Hey everyone, it's Javi here, and in this video we're going to be looking at the difference in product design between notifications and Toast and how you can design both of these with a single reusable component in Figma. If you happen to be new to my channel, welcome. My name is Javi and I make weekly videos about product design skills, principles, and practices to help you build digital products and bring your ideas to life. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. So I am now here in my first slide, and I say slide because I am in Figma, and for this video, I did prepare a small set of slides for us to go through this video together and the step-by-step process until we get to our conclusions. In this first slide, what I wanted to show you is these two components, right? So as I mentioned, we have notifications and we have Toast. Here on the left side, you have a notification, or at least a variant of a notification. And on the right side, you have a Toast. These two components are ones that I use in production design at my own company, at Tribe. And here are just two samples of those that we are going to go over. And this video, part of it at least, is besides explaining the differences between the two, also being able as a designer in Figma to create both of these from the same root component. I call it super component, and I've seen videos where people call it in different ways, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to continue with super component, which basically means that inside each of these, if we look at the layer structure here, let me bring this over to the top just to make sure you can see it. So if we are looking at this, for example, you see that this notification component has a nested component within it, and so does Toast. Might be a bit confusing at this stage what that means, but don't worry, we are going to get to it. So now going to the next slide here, you can see that this is our super component, right? So this is what we are going to be ultimately designing. That is going to allow us to cater to the ability of being able to design both of these components from this one, right? So from this component, this should have everything that we need in order for us to then build a notification and build a Toast component. Now, in order for us to better understand the differences of when you would use a notification, when you would use a Toast component, I did put together some examples per component with real life examples of how at Tribe we are using notification and Toast. And here I'm starting off with just 3 examples of our notification component, right? So just off the bat, if you look at these 3, and let me just remove the controls here so we get a bit more real estate on the screen, you can see as a sort of similarity or pattern across these 3 is that these have all some form of, a call to action, whether it's like these split buttons here, the buttons in the bottom, maybe you just want to have like one split button. They all are encouraging some kind of action on the notification itself, right? So here, for example, we have a connection request from John, and we can either accept or decline that. Here we are having an invitation from Sarah to join this sort of group of volunteer program for WWDC, and we have some very clear call to actions here to accept or decline. And in this case, for example, we have a mention of a user on some kind of thread. And it's a nice way of using this component because we are actually leveraging the description line within the component to give a little bit of a preview of where exactly that mention lives and what the message is about. So it's really going to encourage the user to actually want to get involved in that conversation. And here we just have a primary action that we really want to encourage. And that is why we have this reply right here. So as you can see, all 3 of these, what they have in common is that actionable elements, and also the fact that at least in Tribe, in the context of how we use notifications, they are very related mostly to user activity, and they tend to be a little bit more persistent than Toast. So as we're going to look at now, Toast tend to last a little less in the screen for various reasons. And these ones we are going to leave there just for a little bit longer until they disappear from view. And another thing about notifications typically compared to Toast is that you can, depending on how you design your product, you typically will have a dedicated page for notifications where if you don't want to just react to this right now, you can get back to those later. at your own time, right? So that's a little bit about notifications and how we use them in the context of Tribe. Now going to our toast indicators here, our toast component, here are just 3 examples of random usage, and not necessarily related to Tribe in this case, but these are just very common patterns also just across multiple products. So for example, here you can see that mainly these are a lot less about user activity and more about feedback loops within your product, right? So if, for example, the user that you have right now is using the product and there is some form of action that the user is taking, like for example, wanting to make some changes to his account, his or her account settings, and then they're going to go ahead and like click on an update button, this toast indicator is going to allow you to have that closed feedback loop of actually letting the user know like, hey, like you've made some changes and we've processed that, like those changes internally, and you're good to go, right? So it gives the user like a form of expectation of, okay, what I just did actually went through, so we're good to go. Sometimes you may want to use toast as just like little error states here. So for example, let's say you have like a billing section and you have like a credit card area, and maybe you hit update my credit card details, and one way to capture the attention of the user if something goes wrong is by giving you like a little toast indicator of like, hey, something's going on, like please check your credit card info, and put that there again, right? So it tells you that something's wrong, but it also gives you some action of what you can actually do to fix the error, right? So in this case, it's not quite error prevention, but helping the user diagnose what is going on, how they can go about fixing that error. And sometimes, in the case of, this is just like a joke on Twitter because you can't really undo tweets. But for example, at Tribe, we have like moderation, right? So administrators and moderators have the ability to look at posts that got reported, and sometimes the moderator will click on the wrong button of either to allow a post or to remove it. And so having like this really quick option here to just undo or redo that action can be helpful. Of course, not always you will have these kind of actions on a toast, because both notifications and toasts are coming from the top right, at least on Tribe, of the screen. And many other products that is the case. And this is either going to be on your top right or bottom right. It's going to be somewhere that it's visible, but it's not too much in the way of what the current or what the main user flow is going to be, right? But in cases like these where you do want to have access to this undo action, sometimes you'll put it like a bit more within the flow itself, so it's actually more at reach. Because one of the things about these toast indicators is that generally they're not going to stay within screen for a long time. So you can either make it obvious that you can just remove it by clicking on this X button, but at the same time, these are just like non-essential feedback loops. It's sort of just like reiterating of something that is already final, and the user just has to have a quick glimpse at it to just realize that everything's okay. But it's not going to require the user to spend a lot of time to actually go through the content, right? So versus in notifications, what we have is some kind of information that is important, is relevant, and you want to keep at reference for later. In the case of toast, it's more of like, okay, this is just temporary one-time information that I'm giving you now because it's relevant for you right now, but it's not going to matter so much later. So hopefully that made some sense. And now that we looked at different examples between notifications and toast, again, these are real life examples of how we are using notifications and toast, and you have a better idea of, within your own product, how you can use these for different occasions. Now that we have that in mind, we can actually go to the next step of the video, which is, okay, so we have these 2 components, these 2 use cases, but at the same time, as a designer, you have to always find ways to design with reusability in mind. If you want to speed up the time to production, make it easier for engineers to also be able to leverage less lines of code in order to get to the same results, And given that you're working with some kind of framework like React, where that level of reusability is just sort of indented or built by design within your product, then you can actually do that within Figma as well, right? So with the latest features in Figma, you're also able to build these sort of like super complex components, and then from those components you can then build smaller ones or more specific ones that are going to leverage that component. So that is what we're going to look at today, right? So how from this component, which is our super component, we can actually get to design these two sort of child components that are coming out of it. So there's a couple steps to this, and I put them slide by slide, and here is where it all starts. I put the text here because if there is something that is obvious for us right now, is that both the toast and the notification, they both have some kind of text, right? So you're going to have some kind of title and a description, and that is the same case for toast. So why not start there, right? So here, if I bring back my layer structure and we look at this, what you can see is that I essentially have an auto layout with my title and description. One tiny or two tiny things here that I could mention is that we do have a little bit of padding here at the top, and that is because once you get to situations where you have like this icon right here, you want to be able to have a little bit of alignment or proper alignment between the title text and the icon. So let me just illustrate. If that was not the case and we didn't put that padding, then you can see that because of the auto layout, the alignment is not going to be quite there. So this is just a little fix in order for us to actually get that right. And that allows us to not have to then deal with things like line height or things like that. Okay, so we're good to go. We don't have to worry too much about constraints and resizing. That will come later. All we want to know at this stage is that both of these components will share some kind of title and description. Okay, great. Now we can, start to add elements around it. So I not only have my, my title and description, but I also have here an element, which I called element because this can either be an icon or an avatar, right? As you saw in those examples. So to illustrate what that means, let me just drag that over here and show you. This is actually also an auto layout, and it's just like a very simple one. And what you can see is that you are either going to have one of the two layers hidden, right? So in this case, I want to show the icon, but maybe now I want to show the avatar. And because we have this element, frame around them, they're going to fall nicely into view depending on which one I want. So that is the element frame over here. So we put that here. These are not connected yet. We will do that in the next step. But just so you know, I do want to have it roughly 12 pixel spacing. So that's that. And then at the bottom here, I want to have these action buttons, right? So these are just two button components. They are within an auto layout with 12 pixel spacing between them. And also I added a little bit of padding on the top just so it gets a little bit more of a breathing room with respect to the content itself. Okay, so that's easy. And then on the right side, what we have here is the close button, which in our design system is a separate component. And as you can see, it just has like 16 pixel spacing on the side. So a little bit more than with respect to the element here. And that's because, these three things have a lot more to do with each other than this. This is just more about like the component itself, but this is actual information that the user has to go through. So that is why these are, in terms of spacing, a little bit more close to each other. And here on the very right side, we have another custom component that I made called actions. So if we just quickly had a look at what that looks like, I'll give you a teaser. These are just trailing buttons that, depending on whether you have one or two, I'm just adjusting the border radius. So here you have like a full variant, and here you have a top variant and a bottom variant. These are just three states for that button. And here I have either a 2-button state or a 1-button state. So that is that. I got this really nice inspiration from the Tailwind UI Figma kit, which is excellent. Okay, so that's that. So I know I want to have those there, right? So we're good to go. Now, if I move to the next screen, what we're actually going to start doing now is connecting things together. And while we are connecting, what we're also going to do is work on our constraints to make sure that as we are moving things, we're resizing as needed, everything's going to fall into place. So let's start off with text and buttons here. This is probably the simplest. So if I bring this into view, what you'll see, and let me just give us a little bit more visibility here. We have our text plus buttons. I just generally name these layers as such. Like I just literally put what two things are being connected with, like within this auto layout, put it as a title. It'll be nice and intuitive for you. So here we have text plus buttons. It's a simple auto layout with 8 pixel spacing between them. So there you go. That's the first connection. We're good to go. And once you do connect this, it might be important that at this stage you set the title and description resizing to fill container. And what that will do, and to HUD contents on the top and bottom, what that will do is that if I am resizing this, as you can see, the text is going to adjust accordingly. So that works pretty well. Now that we have that in place, we can move to the next connection, which is the left element. So all you have to know with respect to this, so again, we look at here, it says element plus content, and that contains element and what we created earlier of our text plus buttons. Excellent. So this is another auto layout. In this case, it's horizontal rather than vertical. And as you can see, it has a 12 pixel spacing between the two. And the good thing about this is that now, this whole thing is fill container. And this one is HUD contents, because if I then were to want to change this to avatar, we have to be able to adjust that accordingly. So as you can see, if I am changing things around, all the content is going to adjust accordingly as we want. So that is pretty nice. I'm going to leave the icon just for now. And okay, so we have that. Now what we are going to connect is the close button. And these are done in 2 different steps because, when you have auto layout, you have to define a consistent spacing between the elements within that auto layout. Which means that, we can't do it within a single one, because if you'll notice, and as I mentioned earlier, the spacing here is 12 between the left element and the text, or rather this whole column. And then if you look at this one here, it's 16. So it cannot possibly be the same auto layout. So what we are going to do is we did the first step all together, and then we are going to put another auto layout on top that will take that into consideration. So now we have content plus close button that contains close button, and then element plus content. And this is again a horizontal auto layout with 16 pixel spacing, and this is set to fill container as usual, and this is just fixed because we're not going to be adjusting the size of our close button here. So we have that in place. The last thing that we have to introduce is our split buttons. In order for us to do that, I did take the liberty of expanding this a little bit. So I added some padding on the sides, and you can do that by coming here to your padding all around and add some 16 pixels for a little bit of a breather. And then all I did is I added a new auto layout on top that at this point I called my super notification, which will be the name of our super component. And as you can see, this is set to fill container, everything else as well as we have it since we've been connecting things. And here on the right side, we have our split buttons enabled, and this is just going to be HUD contents and fill container. So we have everything we want here. One other thing that I did here is I went into the content plus close button and I added a little bit of a radius, a border radius. I didn't do it on the super notification layer itself because I do want to respect that, for example, here, the border radius is defined per button. So if we are following this on a component level, it should be appropriate that we put the border radius within this inner layer right here. So now we have that in place. We have our super component. So all we have to do now, and this is where the fun really kicks in, is we are going to create these two components here that I have out of a variant of our super notification component. Now, what this means is that I took what we had before and I made a component out of it called super notification. And from that component, I then made two duplicates. One was called, one I put inside a new component called notification. So literally what this means is I took this, I duplicated holding my Alt key, and now I do Control Alt key or Command Alt key on Mac. And now I have this wrapper around it for, whatever I want to call this new component. Once you do that, it's important that you also come in here and you adjust the width to fill container. So as you are moving the outer layer here, the one inside is also going to adapt as well. So that's just an important comment. Anytime you are doing this kind of like nestedness of components, keep an eye out on constraints, because otherwise you will bump into some obstacles down the line. All right, so let's start with this one. How do we get from here to here? Okay, so first things first, let's go from left to right. I have this icon here, but what I want to actually have is an image. So let's come here to the element. I'm going to just click, into it, or if you want to like speed up the process, something that you can also do is hold your Control or Command key, and then as you can see, if I'm hovering over the layers, it's going to go to the the innermost nested component or element that is here. So in this case, if I were to do that, as you can see, it goes literally to the vector, which is not, it's not the level of detail that I need for this. I actually have to take a step back into this right here. So here, as we did before, I'm just going to change the icon for the avatar, and now we're good to go. Now I have the avatar defined, so that's fine. In terms of the title, I don't have to do much. I just literally have to change the copy. So I'm liking that. We've got the title that we wanted, and also the description is also good to go. What we do not want are these buttons. So I'm going to come here to my action buttons here and remove them. And if we did all the auto layout correctly, as you can see, as I am removing them from view, everything is going to adapt magically. Awesome. So we're getting close. The last few things we have to do here is come over here to our close button, and I'm going to go ahead and remove it. So that will give us automatically a little bit more of space for the content itself. And then the last piece here is actually come to my split buttons and remove the 2-button variant, which I have defined here. So now we just have one action. I can change this to reply, and as you can see, everything else adapts accordingly. I do have my doubts generally about this. I think probably split buttons should have like a fixed width to keep them consistent, but for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to go too much in depth on that. So now all I have to do is resize this a little bit if I do want to be specific. Great, that looks pretty good. In my avatar component, one neat thing that I did, typically when you're designing product mocks and you have like this product with like users and you want to show like different people, there's multiple ways you can go about this. There's wonderful plugins from Unsplash, for example, that allow you to input any image here. I personally want to load up this avatar component with a bunch of images in the fill layers here, and if I want to switch this up, I can do so from here. So I'll turn off this guy and I'll turn on this dude right here. So that's just like one other way to do it, which is pretty fast for me. Great. So I think this is pretty much it. We have our notification component from our super notification. Awesome. And it's worth noting, of course, that if you are doing like variants for this, type of component, you will have a bunch, right? So you might have variants here with avatar or icon. How many actions do you want? Do you want the description to show true or false? What's the call to action style? So, depending on your product, you're going to want to, enable a variation of these variants. It's truly up to you. But again, the process of doing so is just, if you have that super component, it's just, hiding and showing layers, which is really handy. So now we have this, and what we want to get to is here. So again, we don't want to have these buttons, right? We already have the icon here that we wanted. Maybe let's actually take the time to come here, and you see here we already have our selection color. We can easily just go to the color that we want. In this case, we're using Danger Primary. Pretty good. And now what we also have to do is remove these action buttons here, the split buttons. Boom, done. Everything is adjusting accordingly. And now it's mostly a matter of UX copy and colors. So the colors, I'm not going to go through all of them, but just so you know, we do have this Danger Bolder here and this Danger Bold. If you have, these are nice colors to have in your design system styles, because you're going to want to have maybe some components where these are dependent on some kind of like system status, right? And that can be like, hey, you got an error or a warning or a success. And these typically tend to be some kind of like red, amber, green, and then you have like the typical info blue style as well. So I have those set up. Now I'm going to go into my super notification where I can see this background primary. I'm going to change it over to lighter, Danger Lighter. That's good. Okay. And now I do have a variant nicely set up for my close button here. Instead of variant tribe, I'm going to change this to, let's say, error. This should actually say danger rather than error if I want to be consistent, but that does it. And I think we do have to adjust here our border radius to be 4 all around. Excellent. So that's pretty much it, right? We took this super notification component, which is designed as we did, and I was able to take this very same component and create 2 child components out of them, which I then wrapped into a component on my own, so I can then go ahead and like configure all the variants I want. And by the way, with the toast, these are the kind of variants that I have set up within my product. So within Tribe, so here you can see that some of them have these like link actions. Typically it's a little bit more low key than actually having buttons. There's also a variant with actions on the title itself, because sometimes your toast may not necessarily need a description. And sometimes like you don't even want to put this dismiss button because it's just going to go away in 5 seconds, like in the case of like undoing something, right? So that's just the setup for toast, right? Now what's missing is we can actually go ahead and add some shadows here. So I have these nicely set up in my effects. Let's drop some large shadows here to make sure they really stand out in our UI. And I believe that's pretty much it. One thing to mention here at this point as well is, okay, like why exactly did we have to use a super component in the first place? Like, why couldn't I just take like, we already have like these components for like avatar and split buttons and, the text style. So why did you actually make me go through this whole like super component process? And the answer is not just like reusability. It gets you into a nice mindset for product design if you're working collaboratively with engineering on design system level stuff. But it also can optimize your design process over time. If, let's say, you need to make changes across styles and components that are very similar to each other and you want to make sure you want to keep that consistency. So, just for example, let's say that in the future, I say, we are going to make some like platform level changes to how we handle spacing, let's say. And we're no longer going to have like this 12 pixel spacing between the element and the text. We want it to be 8, right? So if I had these as different components, I would have to go literally component by component and make those changes. However, because I have a super component, all I have to do is come here to the appropriate auto layout, change this to 8 pixels. And now any component that is leveraging the super component is going to be automatically in sync. So here you have our notification, and here you have our toast, perfectly in sync, right? So that's one thing that's pretty nice. Maybe, you get some feedback like, hey, this icon is not very visible, right? So, all right, let's go ahead and go to our icon and make it 32. And if you did all the auto layout accordingly, then it's just going to be there. Of course, you then probably have to go and adjust the padding situation here, or decide what you generally want to do. But the point is that now it will be properly in sync with any component that leverages that. And in the case of what I'm working on here, I do have some other examples of super components that I do use across other components. So for example, this avatar component is here because when I am resizing within the avatar component itself, I'm keeping proportions, but also, it's also in place in other components as well. This button super component is here because it allows me to make quick changes to the base button without having to go to 80, 100 variants and make border radius changes. That could take forever, right? Or if I want to remove the shadow, for example, it would take a little bit of time. So that's an example. Another common example could be your input, right? So your input component can serve you for multiple other components, like a search or a select. It's really up to you, how much you want to use this sort of super component behavior, because it does get a little bit tricky once you go into the layer structure. You got to do all these auto layouts. But once you do actually get the whole of it, and you have to think about, okay, I have to maintain this design system over time, it can become very useful. So that's what we did here, right? We created a super component for us to have all this level of reusability and optimization of our design process. And we were able to take this and create these two out of them. And that is it for today. I hope that you found this video useful. If you did, don't forget to let me know by hitting the like button. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions about anything that we covered in this video, or stuff that you want to see in future videos in my channel, please also let me know in the comments section below. I do read everything that you all put out there. So thank you so much. And I hope that you're well and stay safe, and I will catch you in the next one.